Oliver, my younger brother, caught me in the middle of my private deed. But I must say that I didn't mind at all. In fact, I don't think he did either. It all began one quiet Tuesday night. The home was quieter than normal, and only my younger brother Oliver and I remained after my parents had left for the evening. Although he had always been the playful one and had a talent for coming up with the most inventive ways to irritate me when we were kids, things had now settled into a more mutual rhythm. I had returned home from college for fall break, and the house felt calm, and we didn't irritate each other as much. The flood of memories hit me as soon as I came through the door, even though it had been months since my last visit. Although the posters on the walls were faded, my old room was still largely intact, and the desk was piled high with items my parents had accumulated over the years. Although I could see Oliver had changed as soon as he entered the kitchen to greet me, it was like traveling back in time. I had missed the sense of being at home, surrounded by things I knew. He was larger and more self-assured than the scrawny, awkward boy I recalled from a few years ago. He didn't even appear like the same guy anymore. It was as though you were seeing a stranger for the first time. Yet they seemed strangely familiar. I was gazing at him when he asked, but I didn't respond. I shook my head rapidly and remarked, "You just look different." He scratched the back of his neck and smiled. "Try it sometime, Jennifer, it's called growing up." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help but smile since he had a way of making everything seem lighthearted and as though nothing was ever too serious. However, that night, after supper and hours of catching up, I finally went to my bed because there was something more about him that I couldn't quite place. My old bed creaked as I lay down, the mattress sagging in all the familiar places. The house was quiet, save for the occasional sound of Oliver moving around in his room down the hall. The day had been long, filled with travel, unpacking, and dealing with the emotional overload of returning home after a long absence. All I wanted was a shower and a good night's sleep. I closed my eyes and let the familiarity of home fill me, but instead of falling asleep, my thoughts drifted. I hadn't had intimacy of any type in a very long time. I hadn't had the opportunity to connect with anybody in months, and that reality weighed on me as I lay there in the dark. College life was hectic, and more work than socializing. I shifted restlessly under the covers, my thoughts going in unexpected directions. And then, suddenly, my thoughts turned to Oliver. I felt my breath catch as I remembered him standing in the kitchen earlier that evening. The way his shirt clung to his chest, the effortless assurance in his smile, and the warmth of his embrace. I had dismissed it at the time, but now, in the quiet of my chamber, those ideas returned with more clarity and intensity. What was wrong with me? My heart ached as I recalled how Oliver, my younger brother, looked at me when I teased him, his eyes glimmering with mischief, and I imagined his voice low and teasing, whispering my name. I shouldn't have been thinking about him like this, but the more I tried to ignore the thoughts, the stronger they got. He was no longer only different in look. He now had a presence that made him difficult to ignore. My body heated as my thoughts continued to spin, and I bit my lip. My fingers crept reluctantly beneath the cover at first, but it didn't take long for me to let myself get lost in the moment. I closed my eyes and allowed the illusion to take over. I felt alive for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. When the door to my room opened, I was totally absorbed in my own world. Jennifer Oliver's voice broke the stillness, and I froze, my heart stopping in my chest. He stood in the doorway, his hands still on the doorknob, his eyes wide as they took in the scene. My face burned as I realized how exposed I was, my hands still under the blanket, my breathing heavy. I frantically sat up, pulling the blanket around me as if that would erase what he had just witnessed. "Oliver, what the hell?" I raised my voice higher than I meant to. "Do you know what knocking is?" I had no idea, he stammered, his cheeks flushed. He averted his gaze and clumsily scratched the back of his neck. "I was just curious if you were interested in seeing a movie or whatever." Even though my voice quivered with humiliation, I yelled, "Clearly I'm busy." And it was 11 p.m. Oliver went to bed. I was certain he could hear my heart thumping so loudly. I can see that he mumbled as he stared at my sheets, his tone ranging from horrified to amused. He gave me another look, his eyes lingering for a second before he immediately averted my gaze once again. "Well, I'll let you handle it." He started to walk away, but I yelled, "Wait!" before he could shut the door. I had no idea why I had said that. Perhaps it was the anxiety, or perhaps it was the tension that pervaded our relationship. The word, whatever it was out before I could stop it. Oliver stopped touching the doorknob and turned back to face me, his face still red and his expression inscrutable. In reality, I didn't want him to go just yet, but I was racing through my head for anything to say or a way to turn things around. "I apologize. I didn't intend to shout." With a little nod, he briefly looked into my eyes before quickly averting his gaze. He responded, "It's okay," in a calmer tone. I should have knocked. We stood there in stillness, the tension between us heavy and thick, my face still burning with humiliation, my pulse in my ears. But there was also something more, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Would you like to enter?" Before I could think them out, I blurted out the words. Oliver arched an eyebrow, obviously taken aback by the inquiry. "Really?" I said hastily, but hesitantly, "since you're already here." He paused for a second before entering and shutting the door. He leaned against the wall and folded his arms over his chest, his face wary but interested. After a time, he asked, "What exactly were you doing in here?" I moaned and pulled the blanket over my head as my face began to heat up once again. God forbid that we didn't discuss it. Oliver's warm, deep laugh caused my chest to constrict for some reason. "I'm teasing you, Jennifer, so calm down." I glared at him as I peered out from beneath the cover. "You're such a jerk," I said, and his mocking smirk made my pulse skip a beat. "Yes, but you still love me." Oliver was still leaning casually against the wall with his arms crossed and that teasing smirk on his lips. I couldn't tell if he was genuinely amused or just trying to lighten the mood, but it wasn't working. My heart was still pounding from the embarrassment of being caught, and I couldn't look him in the eye for more than a second without wanting to crawl under the blanket and disappear. "Jennifer," Oliver said, his voice softer now. "Calm down." I didn't answer, but the truth was that he wasn't wrong. It's not as though I haven't witnessed worse. Even worse. I gave him a doubtful glance while attempting to gather myself. "Do you know what's worse than seeing your sister?" He shrugged, his grin growing. "Oh, I don't know," he said. At one point, I couldn't help but giggle when I saw Dad cutting his shirtless nose hair. It was a small laugh, more like a startled chuckle, but it was enough to relieve some of the tension. Oliver smiled, obviously pleased with himself, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal again, like we were just two siblings hanging out, with no awkwardness or unspoken tension. However, the feeling was short-lived, as there was a heavy silence that followed, and I could feel his eyes on me, watching me too closely. It made my skin prickle, as if he could see right through me, past the embarrassment and into the thoughts I was desperately trying to ignore. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, as if it could protect me from whatever was going on between us. "What?" My cheeks were burning as I looked at him after my head jerked up. "No, I wasn't." "What sort of inquiry is that?" He shrugged once more, his face defiantly composed. "It must have been someone unique, and I'm just suggesting that you look into it quite a bit." I threw a pillow at him, and he grabbed it easily while giggling, as if he knew Oliver. "Will you please stop?" "Fine, fine." He raised his hands in a gesture of fake surrender while continuing to chuckle, but his countenance changed and became more solemn. "Jennifer, don't panic. I'm only playing tricks on you," he said. "Maybe don't come into my room unannounced next time." And I sighed, running a hand through my hair. For a moment, neither of us said anything, and I found myself staring at him, taking in the way the soft light from my bedside lamp highlighted the curve of his jaw and the way his hair fell slightly into his eyes. He had always been a handsome kid, but now he looked different, older, and more confident. It was confusing, as if I was seeing him for the first time. Why are you observing me in that manner? It was too late for me to realize that I had been looking as Oliver's words cut through my thoughts. I began, but he interrupted me with an eyebrow raise. Yes, you were. I moaned as I covered my head with the blanket once more. Oliver, just leave. Nope, not until you explain the situation to me. The blanket muffled my voice as I shouted. There's nothing going on. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Something was happening that I couldn't even begin to explain or comprehend. And the way he was staring at me now, as if he could see right through me, wasn't making Oliver approach. Oliver sat on the edge of the bed, and I felt the mattress dip under his weight, and my heart skipped a beat. He was standing inches from me as I peered out from beneath the cover. His eyes were searching mine as if he was trying to figure out something, and his expression was inscrutable. You're behaving strangely, he muttered. I mumbled. What's wrong? But my voice lacked conviction. Come on, talk to me, Jennifer. He continued in a gentle yet forceful tone. My chest constricted as I hesitated. I had no idea how to articulate my feelings or put them into words without coming out as utterly crazy. I just sucked hard. It's been a strange night. How was I meant to tell him that I couldn't stop thinking about him? That he had been on my mind the entire night? And that even now, sitting so close, he was all I could think about? Oliver tilted his head, observing me strangely as I was unable to respond and the words refused to come. I turned my head away and concentrated on the blanket tucked into my lap, hoping he would drop it. But he didn't. Instead, he remained exactly where he was waiting, his presence unavoidable. Jennifer said, his voice softer this time, but you could tell something in his tone broke through the barrier I had been maintaining. It wasn't mocking or critical. Rather, it was sincere, full of worry, as if he genuinely cared. And that made it even more difficult to hold everything within. I don't know what's wrong with me, I said, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. I feel as though I'm thinking inappropriate thoughts about you. My gut twisted as I admitted the words that lingered between us. It was unbelievable to me that I had really uttered it out. He remained exactly where he was, his face impassive, and I braced myself for his reaction, expecting him to laugh it off, pull away, or become upset. What sort of things? His voice was low as he inquired, seemingly unsurprised that I had told him this. I paused, my throat constricted, repeating things I shouldn't be thinking while keeping my gaze on the blanket. I have no idea why that happened. Oliver remained silent for a while, and I could feel my chest getting tighter with each second that went by. Then, to my surprise, he reached out and placed a light hand on my arm. It was a soft, almost tentative touch, but it still gave me a shock. It's okay, Jennifer, he murmured steadily and quietly. With my heart racing, I glanced up at him. The words lingered in the air between us, weighty and full of meaning. Yeah, it's okay. He nodded, his hand still on my arm. Oliver spoke calmly and steadily, but my chest constricted from the weight of his words. For a long minute, his steady, confident gaze gave me the impression that he wasn't simply saying it to cheer me up, even if I wasn't sure whether I had heard him correctly, if he truly meant it, or if he was just trying to make things less awkward between us. There was a heavy but comfortable stillness between us, as if we were both waiting for the other to say something that would ease the tension or advance the conversation. Oliver, I began, my voice wavering. I have no idea what is wrong with me. He cocked his head slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on mine. Why do you believe there is a problem? Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, with you, because this isn't normal. My younger brother is you. My family is you. He interjected. I shouldn't stop. His voice was stern yet soft, and he lightly squeezed my shoulder with his palm as it slid from my arm. Don't do that. Don't give the impression that you're broken or anything. He interrupted me again, saying, Jennifer, you're not some kind of freak. You're just feeling something, and that's okay. I blinked, taken aback by his remarks. Is it? I questioned, scarcely raising my voice above a whisper. Since it doesn't seem right, does it? From where I'm sitting, it looks like you're beating yourself up over something you can't control. And honestly, I don't think you should, he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. The way he looked at me and talked made me feel as though he wasn't only trying to console me. There was something more going on there, something deeper, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But it made my chest hurt in a way I couldn't describe. How come you're not panicking out? I questioned, my voice shaking. Regarding this, his lips quirked into a tiny smirk, and he shrugged. You should be freaking out. He interrupted me once again, saying, do you trust me, Oliver Jennifer? Maybe I'm just better at keeping my cool than you are. I was caught off guard by the question. He responded quietly, of course I trust you. So trust me when I say this doesn't have to be a big deal. It's just us. It is not necessary for anybody else to know or comprehend. His words, it's just you and me, made me shiver and made my chest tighten. He spoke in such a calm manner that it sounded so simple. But it was actually complicated, messy, and terrifying. Nevertheless, the way he looked at me and placed his hand on my shoulder gave me the impression that it might not be Oliver. I said, my voice barely audible. Who are you? He said steadily. I care about you, and if this is something you're feeling, then maybe I feel it too. I'm saying I don't care if it's normal or not, he said. I gazed at him with my breath stuck in my throat, wondering whether he truly meant it. Did he actually say what I believed him to say? All I knew was that my heart was beating so loudly that I could hardly hear anything else before I stopped myself. I had no idea how to react or what to do. My hand brushed his as I extended it. Instead of pulling away, his fingers wrapped around mine, his touch solid and warm. The small action sent a surge of comfort through me. But it was accompanied by something deeper that I didn't want to describe. I'm not sure what to do. With a quivering voice, I confessed. He responded softly. I don't even know what this is to me either. But perhaps we don't need to know. Perhaps we can simply work it out together. I couldn't tell why I was so emotional or why his words struck me so strongly, but they caused my eyes to sting and my chest to hurt. I gently nodded, briefly seeing that his hand was fine. We just sat there with our hands intertwined, the quiet between us full of unspoken understanding, none of us moving. Before I could overthink it, I leaned in. It seemed as though the world had vanished, leaving only the two of us in this moment that seemed both inevitable and impossible. It wasn't flawless. There was a clumsiness to it, a nervousness that came from the ambiguity of what we were doing. But it was real. His lips were warm, and I could feel the little trembling in his hand as he gripped mine. The kiss was tentative and gentle, as if we were both testing the waters. We were the ones. His eyes locked with mine as we withdrew, and I saw the same range of feelings that I did: dread, hope, and a great sense of relief that neither of us had to speak. Oliver offered me a little smile while keeping his hand on mine, and all that we were unable to express in words was captured in the way we stared at one another. You see? Not so frightening. I chuckled quietly, my voice unsteady but sincere. He smiled. Speak for yourself. And for the first time that night, I had the hope that everything would work out. After that kiss, the air between us seemed to have shifted irrevocably, and the room seemed electrified. I couldn't read Oliver for the first time in a long time. He wasn't laughing, teasing, or brushing it off, but he was just there, present in a way that made my chest hurt. My heart was still pounding, and my mind was having trouble processing what had just happened. Did that feel wrong to you? He broke the stillness with a kind question. With my voice stuck in my throat, I shook my head. No, I muttered. I shakily exhaled as the weight of his words settled over me. It didn't go well, he added, a tiny smirk pulling at the corner of his lips because it didn't seem wrong to me either. Hearing him say that made everything seem a bit less terrifying since I had spent so much time telling myself that these emotions were abnormal and something to be ashamed of. Now what? My question was hardly audible above a whisper. Oliver shrugged, a softer, more vulnerable grin replacing his previous one. His remarks were straightforward, but they were quite powerful. I've never done this before, Jennifer, but I think we should simply take things one step at a time and work things out as we go. With my fingers still entwined with his, I slowly nodded. All right. The silence between us lingered once more, but this time it seemed light. Rather, it was reassuring, as if we were at last in agreement and letting go of all the stress that had been accumulating between us without words for so long. I felt as though I could breathe for the first time. Would you like to discuss it? After a minute, Oliver inquired. His lips quirked into a slight smile as he cautiously discussed why you've been acting so strange recently. Let's face it, Jennifer, you've been strange. My voice was muffled as I moaned and withdrew my hand from his to cover my face. I don't know, I said. It's just that everything about you feels different now, and it's messing with my head. He asked in a different way, leaning in, and I hesitated a little, my cheeks flaming. I eventually remarked, "You're not the same annoying kid I grew up with. You have self-assurance. Grown up, and I'm not sure how to respond to that." Oliver's smile expanded, and there was a trace of mischief once again in his face. "So you're implying that you find me attractive? Stop, please." The sound made my chest tighten in a way that was both comforting and infuriating. I moaned and threw a pillow at him, and he caught it easily. He then laughed, and for a brief moment, he leaned into me and kissed me again. I'm just saying that he teased by throwing the pillow back onto the bed. You could have said that instead of making it all dramatic. I murmured, "Yeah, well, I'm not exactly thrilled about it." Although my lips curled into a grudging smile. It seemed like we were taunting one another as Oliver's laughing subsided and his face softened. "Jennifer, you don't need to feel embarrassed," he added softly, as he joined my blankets. He added, "It's just us. No one else has to know." His tone was so serene, and it definitely gave me a chest ache. I tightened my throat and nodded. "Yes," I answered quietly, "just us." But while I was saying it, he was lying next to me and had witnessed everything. He didn't say anything, simply moved his fingers to the location, and carried on where I had left off. I had never experienced anything like this before, and it was incredible. I lost control while he was working and begged him to go beyond, which he did. I won't go into specifics, but let's just say that after he finished and we both lay down, it was one of the most bizarre evenings of my life. I sensed that we were both aware of what had recently transpired. The remainder of the night flew by. Something had changed between us. Felt bad in one way, but it also felt like the finest thing I had ever experienced. Though not as strong, the tension was still present. Oliver lingered in my room for a bit, sitting on the side of the bed while we spoke about everything and nothing. It seemed like we had made the first step into something new, something unsure, and were now simply trying to find out how to navigate it. When he eventually left to go to his own room, I felt both relieved and oddly empty. I lay back on the bed and stared up at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of him, the way he'd kissed me, the way his hand had felt in mine, the way he'd looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. It felt like the old days when we were kids and used to stay up late whispering secrets to each other in the dark. But now there was an undercurrent of something else, something deeper, something neither of us fully understood. Even though it was also overwhelming, I couldn't help but notice when I woke up the following morning to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I briefly believed it was our parents, but then I realized it was only Oliver and me because they were away for the weekend. With my pulse pounding at the prospect of seeing him again, I got out of bed and went downstairs. I wasn't sure what to expect, tension or awkwardness, perhaps, but when I entered the kitchen and found him seated at the table with a bowl of cereal, I was taken aback. He gave me a smile and remarked. He looked completely normal, too normal for a morning. "Do you get enough sleep? You like a baby," he joked in a playful tone. But when I sat down across from him, I saw how his gaze lingered on me for a little too long and how his grin softened somewhat, which made my chest clench all over again. Yeah," I muttered as I picked up a cup and poured myself some coffee, though I could feel him watching me. I found it difficult to concentrate on anything else as we ate breakfast in relative silence, with the occasional clink of spoons against bowls filling the air. My thoughts kept returning to the night before the kiss and the way he had said, "Just us, Jennifer." He broke the silence abruptly, and I looked up, my heart pounding at the gravity in his voice. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I blurted out, my voice faltering. "Why wouldn't I be? I just want to make sure you're not panicking since last night was a lot." So he bent his head and studied me. I responded, "I'm fine," even though my cheeks were actually burning. He nodded, but it was clear that he wasn't persuaded. If you believe it, the remainder of the day went by without incident. But the tension between us was still boiling beneath the surface. Every gaze and unintentional hand contact seemed as though we were both waiting for something to happen. It was like a storm building on the horizon, and I knew it was only a matter of time until it broke that evening. When the house was quiet again, I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was coming. And when it did, I wasn't prepared. The air between us had gotten heavier as the day went on, and every little interaction was charged with unsaid tension. I could feel it even when we were sitting in the same room. Silently, Oliver and I were the only ones left after our parents called to let us know they would be spending another night at Grandma's. After dinner, he left me to sit on the couch while the TV played softly in the background. I tried to concentrate on the screen, but my thoughts kept going back to the previous night's events, including the way he had kissed me and the way he had looked at me afterward as though I were more than just his sister. It was both thrilling and terrifying. I was too preoccupied to hear him return downstairs, and when he sat down next to me, I was a little taken aback. "Sorry," he began, his lips quirking into a little smile. "Didn't mean to scare you," I hurriedly responded. "It's fine." Even though my pulse was still pounding. For a long time, we just sat there with the TV shining dimly around the room. Despite the fact that neither Oliver nor I spoke, we could feel the tension between us. Out of the corner of his eye, I could feel him observing me, and it made my skin tingle. Jennifer's voice broke the air, asking if we could speak. The gravity in his tone made my chest tighten as I turned to face him. "What is it about? What about us?" My stomach turned over last night, but I nodded even though I wasn't sure I was prepared for this talk. He replied, keeping his eyes steady. He paused, stroking his hair, then said, "Okay," he confessed. "I've been thinking about what happened and what it means all day." I questioned him in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper, and I believe he trailed off, his cheeks blushing a little. I don't want to act like it didn't happen. I was shocked by what he said, and I gazed at him with my heart racing. "You don't," he said, shaking his head and looking into my eyes. "I don't, Jennifer," because the way he said it made my chest hurt. Yet it felt right. It was so definite, so sure. I started to reply, but nothing came out. I wanted to weep, but all I knew was that he was staring at me as if I were the only thing that mattered. And I had no idea how to express how I felt or what to say. I finally confessed, "Oliver, I'm afraid. This is all so fresh. My voice is shaking, and I'm at a loss for what to do. We'll work things out together." He continued quietly, "So you don't have to know." A chill went through me at the simple touch as he extended his hand and touched mine. I glanced down at our hands before turning back to face him. "Are you certain about this?" I asked myself. My voice was hardly heard as I asked. "I haven't been. Care about you, Jennifer, more than I probably should. But I'm done." He spoke steadily and with greater assurance, despite my best efforts to ignore it. His words struck me like a wave, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in and closed the space between us. The kiss was tentative and gentle at first, but it soon intensified as all the feelings I had been suppressing rushed to the surface. His hands moved to my shoulders, drawing me in closer, and when we eventually withdrew, I felt an unidentified sensation that made my heart swell. "What do we do now?" I pressed my face against his, breathing in quick, trembling gasps. My voice trembled as I asked. He said, "We keep this between us. For the first time in what seems like an eternity, I didn't feel afraid, so I nodded my chest tight, and we worked it out. That night, as we lay side by side on the couch with the TV still playing softly in the background, I realized that, although what we had might not have been normal or something that anyone else could understand, it was ours, and that was enough for the moment. I didn't feel ashamed because all I felt was him, his warmth, his presence, and his unwavering support. It was sufficient. I'm glad I can share my tale, even though I know some people may find it strange. I'm sorry for what I did. Do you want me to tell you? Please share your thoughts in the comments section.